Real questions, real answers for real life. Come on in and pull up a chair. You're at 1850 Main Street with Michael DelGiorno and David Zanotti.
Could anyone become Speaker of the House? Could you? Could I? What's the rule?
You learn something new every day. You do not have to be a member of the House of Representatives to be the Speaker of the House. I did not know that.
Well, and that's the way it was set up according to the original Constitution. And then when the provision of succession came through on later amendments about what happens if the president dies, what happens if the vice president dies, you realize you could have somebody appointed in the 3 spot. And it's never happened. God forbid it ever should happen. But if something should happen with retirement, succession, or some crazy set of circumstances, the third person in command is not the designated survivor. It's the Speaker of the House.
I had a friend text me immediately on upon the ousting of Kevin McCarthy. Is this a big deal? And I guess, politically it's a big deal. If it depends on what we're talking about concerning the debt ceiling, whether McCarthy was there or whomever replaces him. And we're going to talk a lot about Jordan versus Scalise. I suspect they're going to raise the debt ceiling on November 17th. So that makes it much more political than relevant, but hasn't happened very often, a speaker ousted?
No, it hasn't happened very often. And I'll tell you what's interesting, Michael, is bringing back up the debt ceiling really quickly is something that has been going on for all the rest of us, but not many people have been writing about this as it relates to our government. Let's take a look at interest rates. They impact everything. They impact credit cards. They certainly impact home mortgages, car loans. Everyone is suffering.
HELOCs.
Yeah, under the high and ascending interest rates. And what that forces us to do is it forces us to buy less because we simply can't take the risk of going outside that comfort zone, knowing that you're going to get smacked with 8.5%, maybe as much as 20% or more when you get into the credit card world. This goes back to the time of Jimmy Carter. Mm-hmm. And what do? You literally freeze an economy because people aren't going to take any steps outside their normal, common, most safe and secure boundaries. Okay, that's what's supposed to happen when the Fed decides they're going to slow down the economy. Now, we could talk for days. And one of the things that drives me nuts, it's like chasing Bigfoot. It took me about 40 years before I finally got around a group of academics, qualified academics, who we could have an honest conversation on what caused the Great Depression. For 40 years, I've been buying books, reading books, listening to economic stuff, and blah, 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 blah. It was like chasing Bigfoot. So I've got that figured out in my mind. Now, the next Bigfoot I would like to get to.
Can we do that one, though? Because I remember not at the table of 1850, but at another lunch table, you and I had this discussion, and it is fascinating what led to the depression. I mean,
yeah.
So basically you have out of control spending, overspending. That causes the economy to overheat. Then the Fed jumps in and raises interest rates to do what? To get you to stop overspending the way government's overspending. So it's to cool down spending. And if you cool it down too much, throw too much cold water on it, you can override it and fall into a recession. So it's a balancing game of, slowing the economy, slowing the spending. But, we've never had government this out of control, that they're not participating in cutting back.
So chasing Bigfoot would be the equivalent now of figuring out how did the Federal Reserve get this much power and control, because they are literally creating a depression in the housing market. Now, the reason that is so punitive isn't just all the pain we're watching young people go through trying to get their first home, people with $50,000 in the bank and no debt who can't get a home. Because there's no money available. And the money comes now at such high rates that it literally forces them into a situation where they have to buy a third the house that they could have afforded just a few months ago.
They'd rather wait.
I mean,
at that point.
Yeah,
but you brought up the last time we talked, you brought up a great point too, though, which was that when you don't have the inventory, because everybody doesn't want to, I can sell my house, but then I got to go buy one and the interest rates are ridiculous. So I'm going to wait. As they wait, inventory's down too.
And the reason inventory is down is because people that got in with money at 2.5 aren't going out at 8.5. So this is all a very dominant hand of a Bigfoot Federal Reserve and here's the problem. It's not working. By raising those interest rates in the housing market, that usually would naturally drop prices. It hasn't dropped prices because the inventory is at an all-time, world-time, human history low. And now money's so expensive that big home builders aren't coming back in to build more houses. Now, in some markets they're building, the markets that are super hot, but that doesn't matter because the markets are super hot and people can't get into it anyhow. Now, what's the big problem with this? The big problem with this is the greatest way for normal people, working people, the rest of us, to build wealth over a lifetime is real estate. It's the single most important purchase a person makes. And when a family pays out that house and it's done, they have secured their own retirement fund, their own equity fund. It's a very big deal. And it's one of the great promises of the American free enterprise system is that if you're patient and you work hard and you're self-sacrificing and you invest in your own, you can have your own home, your own land. And when you get to the end of your career, you will be able to look and say, that value is mine. Well, when you're retarding people's ability to get into that market 10 years, 15 years with exorbitant interest rates, you're literally denying people the right to create wealth. And that's federal policy that's doing that. So how does this all come back to the government? Let's stop and think about this. The biggest debtor in the United States is the United States. Guess what? The U.S. interest rates are going up also. What happens when the rate we're forced to pay as people, based upon the debt that our Congress has created, gets so high that we have to raise the debt ceiling every 6 weeks to keep up with interest rates? Nobody's thinking about that.
No, I mean, we always said when the debt exceeds the GDP, you're in trouble. Then we exceeded it, and everybody just got used to being in trouble, just like they got used to being $31 trillion in debt, now $33 trillion in debt. But it's now becoming, this is something nobody ever tracks, David, the percentage of our budget that is debt interest.
Yes, and it's huge. And this is the problem for whoever takes the job as the next speaker. They're literally, remember the old, there's a million versions of it, but I remember a board game type thing called Hot Potato, where you get the potato, you wind it up, it's got a clock, and then you throw it around to everybody, and then whoever gets it in the end when it blows up, it's a hot potato. Who wants to be speaker now? I mean, what a lousy job description.
All right, yeah, let's put that. That's big boy thinking. Let's do like what we see on television and hear usually on the radio every day. If this is political, Kevin McCarthy broke a promise, so a handful of us are going to grandstand. I think you got a bigger political problem now, because one thing you could say about McCarthy was he was perceived as a moderate, which is good when you're going after 218 votes. I mean, take Donald Trump supporting Jordan. Is that good for Jordan or good for Scalise?
That's a great question. So let me start with you. I mean, I wanted to talk to you because let's face it, Scalise is from one of your many hometowns.
Louisiana.
Yeah. He's your guy.
The last time I saw him, I ate with him when I was there for the State of the Union. He's a wonderful man. Wonderful guy.
He's a good guy, isn't he?
And a baseball player.
Yeah.
And he can take a bullet.
For his country.
But I think this really comes down to our 218 votes. That's not, an easy thing to arrive at. Jordan, who you go way back with.
Yeah.
Scalise, by the way, I'm a huge fan of Jim Jordan. All right, so Jordan. But I go back with Scalise. Both of them I would consider right side of the aisle.
Sure.
Jordan being the rightest side of the aisle, perhaps too far to the right. Then you add the Trump influence with this endorsement, and my guess would be it's going to hurt him.
Well, let's talk about how the whole thing came down anyhow, because that's been, roundly condemned by the White House and roundly condemned by the press and blah, 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 blah. Let's go back to when they couldn't get a speaker elected back in January. Mm-hmm. And you and I were talking, and everyone was losing their mind. And, oh, my gosh, we've got 5 votes, 13 votes, 21 votes. Oh, the world's coming to an end. And we were like, who cares? They'll get a speaker within the next few days. A week from now, nobody will care. Everybody's in hysterics with their hair on fire. No big deal. The government's not going to shut down without a speaker. Nothing changes. So, okay. And in that particular case, the people who said, just kind of tuck it away for a second here, don't lose your mind, they were right. McCarthy came in, but to get there, he had to make some promises. And they restored a rule that had been around earlier, but had changed. And that rule was simply that one person could initiate, in essence, a recall, a vote of confidence, if we want to use a parliamentarian approach, on the current speaker. They renewed that, and that was the deal. He had to accept that and a few other things. So he said, yeah, he took the job. He took it under the one vote situation. And then the people who gave him the majority warned him what would happen if he did X, Y, Z, and they would then call for him to be defeated, to be removed, vote of confidence, if you will. They kept their word. He didn't. Okay, what'd you expect? And is it a great big deal? Probably not really. Not really that big a deal. Maybe 10 years from now, we'll look back and see that it was historic, but in the immediacy of what has to be done, what's going to really change? Nothing at all.
We talk often about narratives and news cycles. The narrative and news cycle is urgency, unprecedented. You're getting two news cycles actually in one. One is coming from McCarthy and others saying, why would you send this message to the world? The world is in turmoil and you're sending dangerous messages that we can't even govern. Hyperbole. All right. That's how I'm going to end every one of these segments. Then you have the other one going, Hakeem Jeffries, he went and met with the White House. Is he getting foreign affairs, national security briefings? Because right now, technically, an interim can't get those. So will Patrick Henry be getting them? Will they all be getting them? And we've got a debt ceiling November 17th. We got an Iron Dome that needs replenishment. The world is coming to an end. Hyperbole. And then I got you saying, oh, no big deal. Which is it?
I don't know, but you sound like a Muppet. It's outstanding.
Hyperbole.
But I mean, this is honestly, if you don't watch cable news with that kind of humor, you could lose your mind in a heartbeat, because all these people who've never done politics for a living or who've had one two-bit job and now suddenly are world-class experts on foreign policy, national policy, litigation, constitutional law, federal budget, blah, 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 blah. You're right. All they're doing is reading talking points and then heading back to hair and makeup. We're not getting the value. So there's going to be a Speaker of the House. There is a functioning Congress right now, and it will be an internal Republican matter. They've got enough votes to put whoever they want to put in there. Now, they may not be able to keep that person there because obviously in a year there's an election.
When you subscribe to 1850 Main Street, you're the first to find out what's happening next with new guests, publications, and events. And when you spread the word about 1850 Main Street, you're helping others find real answers to the real questions facing America right now. To learn more, visit 1850mainstreet.com. And please, tell a friend.
You said something very loose-lipped there, that we have a functioning Congress. I guess we're going to allow that word. No, but we did just bring up the elephant in the room, which is to say...
should I say barely functioning Congress?
No, but there is going to be an election, and, your opponents use things against you, and that's certainly what I think we're getting the early signs of. The message is going to be, these people can't even get along with themselves, let alone find common ground. They can't even govern when they're in the leadership position. Give us back control of Congress. I mean, everything I would point to says I'd have left things alone, but it's not the end of the world that it happened. If it is somebody like Jim Jordan, I mean, take that one just for a minute and hang on to it for a second. A wrestling coach you've known how many decades could potentially be the Speaker of the House. That's exciting for me. Somebody like Scalise, that's exciting for me. But, it's going to open Pandora's box of political attacks, won't it?
Well, let's go back to the Jordan situation. Both these men have decent backgrounds, and they've served in public service a lot. Fascinating. Both of them started in the state legislature. They worked their way up to a congressional seat, and then they worked their way up the chain of command, if you will. Jordan's been a little faster up that line than Scalise, but both, given the old school, if you had to be there about 50 years to finally become a committee chairman for anything, they both have accelerated that period of time. They both came into this in the post-Gingrich world. Jim Jordan, you're right. He was a wrestling coach and a homeschool dad. And when he came into politics, he started actually with us circulating term limits petitions in the Ohio fight back in 1992. That was his first political exposure. Then he ran for the state legislature. He ran for the House. Then he ran for the Senate. Then he ran for Congress. So he's moved up in office positions on a regular basis. The thing about Jordan that people would probably find most interesting, I find very interesting, is that Jordan was always opposed by the Republican establishment in Ohio. To this day, he is not a hero in his own hometown, in his own state. the Republican Party has even recently, a few years ago, was trying to figure out how to redistrict Jim and maybe get him out of office because he's too conservative for the blasé Republican leadership, and particularly the blasé money crowd, because Jim's not interested in towing the line so that the big corporations get what they want from the federal government. He's a very independent thinker.
Mike DeWine, Governor, Ohio, Republican. Jim Jordan, nothing alike.
No,
same party.
And very much the same set of beliefs on a whole lot of things in regards to core faith and family. They're good human beings, and they've got a good personal testimony about how they've lived and conducted their life, but very, very, very different in regards to political realities and whose water they carry. So Jim has always been opposed by the party. He's always knocked on doors. He's done it the hard way. He wasn't supposed to win in the legislature. He wasn't supposed to win in the Senate. He wasn't supposed to win in Congress. They try to get rid of him every time they get a chance in Congress. And now he's knocking on the door of being the next Speaker of the House, which is pretty darn historic for a guy who started his career in politics with an ironing board in front of a polling place set up to gather term limits petitions. That's a pretty interesting start for somebody.
Well, and we shouldn't lose, and rode a wave of the Tea Party movement as well. And then when he had his moments testifying on the floor or in interviews, he always does very, very well. So he became a darling of the Tea Party as well.
Now, will that background and that personal character be able to straighten out the absolute mayhem that is the Republican Party in power in the House of Representatives? I don't know, Michael, because that's a really weird thing. And here's the problem Republicans have, and I'm not one, but I've been critiquing them and writing about them for a long, long time. And I've been working around to get around those. Our organization has had to work around the Republican Party for 40 years. They're great at theory. They're great on telling people at conventions and on mailers at election time how conservative they are. But then they get into positions of power, and they're always worried about what the press thinks. They always want to play the McCain role. They always want to be the darlings of the media. They don't like it because people don't like them, because the pop culture in the media doesn't like conservatism. And so the pop culture is always trying to tear things down, and these guys are trying to hold things up. And so it's a natural political conflict. It's not unique to America. Well, Jim's been one of those guys who hasn't taken the bait. He's never walked the McCain route. He does what he thinks he needs to do, and he's pretty darn articulate in explaining why. Now, nobody's perfect. There's some things about Jim that drive people crazy, like me, like you, I hesitate to say, but like all of us.
Oh, right? I drive you crazy, but Jim doesn't drive me crazy.
On a regular basis, okay? So this is the way it is. But people know at his core, Jim Jordan's consistent. You know, his family's solid. Now, and by the way, so Scalise, okay? So I don't know, and I don't honestly know if Jordan isn't actually a stalking horse for Scalise. Maybe by Jordan being there,
it paves the way for Scalise.
It paves the way for Scalise, because I know one thing about Jim: he can live with the speakership or not. It is not the necessity of his reality that he's got to be that power guy. He'd be happy to step aside for somebody else.
Nor is moving up to the United States Senate necessarily.
Well, people have been trying to talk to Jim about getting to the Senate for a long, long, long time. Now,
not interested.
No, well, he wasn't interested because he thought he could see the House Judiciary Committee with a window of opportunity. And Jim is a lawyer, and Jim cares a lot about an honest understanding of justice. I tell you, Jim Jordan's a decent human, and he's been doing the right thing for a long, long time when no one was looking. And he and his wife and their kids have paid a price for it. So I would say that based on integrity, either of these guys could be outstanding speakers. The challenge, however, is they've got to get their act together so that they can actually repeat what they did in 2022 if they want to hold those positions. Because what good's being speaker if in 2022, your party loses the majority control and you're out? Gee, that was a great 7 months. I mean,
2024, but yeah.
Excuse me.
I don't want to go back in time and relive these 2 years. It took every Democrat to join a little over a handful of Republicans to oust McCarthy. They can count on none of those Democrats as far as helping them decide this.
Correct.
Are we certain it's down to Jordan and Scalise?
Oh, anything can happen when they get in the caucus. And who knows? It could be. Who knows what might come out of it? I mean, it's anybody's game. You never know for sure. I was quite surprised that Jim said yes, that he would run. I'm sure he was conflicted about that, like he's always been, because it's never been just about him. It's always been the whole thing in perspective. I think it's good for the country. And again, no matter which of these guys is ultimately elected or someone we don't even know, what will really change? Not much. Because no matter what the House does, the Senate isn't going to abide because we have a divided form of our House and Senate. As long as the Democrats are in control, the Republicans will pass symbolic bills that they will campaign on, try to embarrass their opponents on, but will not become law. And basically, Congress is doing nothing. Now, sometimes Americans think if Congress can't get anything done, that's a really good idea because they've done way too much over the last couple hundred years. Let's just give it a break. And I can understand that. You know, when Congress is doing nothing, America's usually doing better. Truth of the matter is, and people understand that. I think we can get a majority vote on that. But there are moments that could come up, like this question on interest and the Federal Reserve. There are issues that, like what's going on in Israel right now.
Yeah, because when they're not acting, the president can. I'll give you an example on Israel.
Yeah.
My son asked me a very serious question about Israel, and I was like, Israel can hold its own. I mean, we're talking about God's chosen people, promises, technology, training.
They don't have a problem with commitment.
Yeah, no, not at all. And so I don't lose sleep at night dealing with Israel, dealing with Hamas. However, I keep a very watchful eye on Iran in these situations. Mm-hmm. I keep a very watchful eye on support from Russia and China of Iran in these situations, and it growing. If all things stay the same, just for those overhearing our conversation right now, there's about $3.3 billion of foreign military financing already approved. That's more than enough in a temporary time to decide who the next speaker is, to make sure they have all the American support they deserve. And I don't have anything critical to say about the way Joe Biden's handled this since the bombing. He has presented a very united front with Israel. I'm grateful for that. He could, and the White House has signified, take several actions on his own. The debt ceiling is until November 17th. That's over a month. And we suspect that the candidate forums will start probably Tuesday of this coming week, and maybe the first rounds of votes midweek, right?
Yeah, I think they'll probably have this done by Friday, unless it turns into a McCarthy situation. But Michael, let me ask you a question, because I'm here in the shadows. I'm thinking about James Carafano, your friend from the Heritage Foundation. You know, it's kind of an interesting situation given the weakness of the administration that we have right now, particularly in regards to American foreign policy. You've got Russia involved in a war with Ukraine, and the United States, so to speak, fighting a proxy war there. Now you've got Israel being attacked. And if Russia steps in with Iran to help support Hamas against Israel, now the United States will be fighting another proxy war on two fronts. Then what happens if, seeing the weakness of the Biden administration, the defunding of our military and the challenges we have, what happens if then China makes a move on Taiwan?
Well, those are all the areas of concern. There's some others that could misbehave too in between those. But I always like to make this distinction, and that is that if Israel, the Middle East is the epicenter of the world, Israel is the epicenter of the Middle East, and the epicenter of the epicenter is Jerusalem, and the epicenter of the epicenter of the epicenter is the Temple Mount. You start having Russia and China joining Iran, joining Hamas and Palestine against Israel. Now you're talking about something we've never experienced and something of a biblical nature. So that's what I call the whole can of beans being thrown at you. I don't assume now, of course, you know as well as I do, in Iran, they were chanting death to America again. Well, they've been chanting that for decades. Mm-hmm. They've also been getting away with, over the last decade, enhancing their nuclear capabilities and closer to having a weapon of mass destruction.
It doesn't hurt when you have pallet loads of cash coming to you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is all
from America.
This is all very, very concerning. You just say it this way. You hope this is another one of those skirmishes with Hamas that will end quickly. The retaliation will be strong, targeted, and complete, and things will be kicked down the road a little longer. If things begin to escalate, that is always the greatest concern. And I think that's a greater concern even beyond foreign policy and world foreign policy. That becomes all-time, even end of time. So you got to be very careful with that. So I'm hoping that's not the case. Now, supporting the Iron Dome for defense systems, you could say that's technically a second proxy war, along with, and I think, to McCarthy's criticism, and of course he's the ousted guy, so he's going to be a little jaded and jilted, but he's right. This is an odd time to have taken such a stand, and it's going to send a lot of bad messages heading into an election. And of course they don't have midterms. When it comes to the House, every 2 years, that House can change. Everybody's up for election. I think between that, the raising of the debt ceiling, some of these foreign policy issues, it's pretty inconvenient timing. I'll give you that. But it's nothing like what the media is trying to make it, which I think gets back to what you were saying, which is, I'm not a Republican either anymore, but I certainly caucus with them. Let's put it that way. I mean, I've only voted for 2 Democrats my entire life, and they were very, very good people deserving it. And they weren't at a level of politics that was influenced by some of the things that steer our partisan voting. So I lean if Republicans would live what they believe in their platform, I'd be pretty happy with them. They just so rarely do. So I think they're on the right side of a lot of the policies, but they don't often govern very well. Democrats, from my view, are always on the wrong side of the policy, and they always got early voting. They always got ground game. They always, when they get control, take advantage of it and push the country extremely to the left. So this will probably just get added to the file of leadership governing challenges for Republicans.
Well, by the time we get to the next cup of coffee, maybe we'll have a speaker.
Maybe it'll be me or you.
The conversations are just getting started. To get connected, check out 1850mainstreet.com. We don't data mine anyone or sell your information. Subscribe today so you don't miss a single conversation. We'll see you next time here at 1850 Main Street.